In this screencast for Lesson 42, we are going to look at how we can remove the majority of our JavaScript code out of the global scope in order to protect it from naming collisions, as well as keeping the clutter in the global scope down. Now, in the text, I believe that I said to copy the files from Lesson 35. And in that same step, I mentioned that we might want to move all of that code outside into an external file. Well, we've already done that with Lesson 40. So if you want to go ahead and copy the files from Lesson 40, that's going to be fine. At least that's what I did. So I need to change the title of the HTML to Lesson 42, and I also need to change the URL for our external JavaScript file to Lesson 42 as well. Let's open up our event utility file. Now this is an object that we have come to rely upon ever since we wrote it. In fact, I can't really think of a lesson that we didn't use it. So it would be a shame if we incorporated somebody else's code into our web page and they had an object of the same name and overwrote what we have here. So we want to protect this just a little bit more so that we don't lose that if we incorporate somebody else's code. So we are going to use a pseudo namespace. Well, at least that's what I call it. It's actually just another object. And we are going to put this event utility as a property of this other object. Now, we're going to test to see if this other object that we are going to use, this pseudo namespace, exists. We are going to call it JS24hour, and we want to make sure that it is undefined, because if it is, then we are going to create it. Now this is very important because as we start to do the same thing with Ajax utility, we want to make sure that we do not overwrite the JS24hour object that may have been created in Ajax utility. In fact, if we look at our includes here, we have event utility listed first and Ajax utility listed second. So if we had this code here, and we create the JS24hour object, we're okay right now. But if we go into Ajax utility and do something like this, var JS24hour, then we have essentially overwritten what we have done here. So we want to make sure that this does not exist. And if it doesn't, then and only then do we want to create this object. So while I have Ajax utility open, I'm going to go ahead and add this code here. And while we're in this file still, let's just go ahead and make the change that we are going to make. It's a really easy change. We are just going to make Ajax utility a property of this JS24hour object. And we are going to do the same for event utility here. So now we have removed event utility and Ajax utility out of the global scope, but they are still properties of a global object. Well, unfortunately, we really can't get away from the global scope. So the more obscure we can make our code as far as the global scope is concerned, the better off we really are. So we have these two changes done. We need to make a few changes to the JavaScript code inside of this external file here. So let's go ahead and close our Ajax utility and event utility. Now everything we have listed here is in the global scope, at least these functions are, and it would be nice if we could protect them from the global scope. Well, we can. Remember that we do have functional scope, and anything that is declared within a function has that scope within that function. It's outside of, or it's just out of the global scope. So what we can do is we can execute an anonymous function like this here. And now everything within this code, or everything within this function here, is out of the global scope. It's inside of the scope of this function. But we execute this function and the rest of this code executes. And since we have all of our code within this external file, everything's going to be fine because everything here is referenced within this functional scope. So everything is going to be fine except for our usage of Ajax utility and event utility. But we can easily get around that by creating some variables here. So we can do Ajax utility equals JS 24-hour dot Ajax utility, and we will do the same thing for event utility. Event utility equals JS 24-hour dot event utility. Now we are doing it this way, one, because it caches these objects. We don't have to type all of this, and two, since we already have these identifiers in use, it's just a simple change that we have to do here. Otherwise we would have to tack on JS.24hour every time we used Ajax utility or the event utility. And this way it's just a whole lot easier. So just to make sure that our code is still going to execute, let's open this up in our browser. And we will go to localhost lesson 42. And this is lesson 42 underscore example01.htm. And refresh again, and if we type in Toyota and Camry and just any date, then whenever we click submit, we will get our match here. And just to make sure that the failure works too, that works as well. So we have essentially removed the majority of our code outside of the global scope. It's now inside of this function. And in the case of our event utility and Ajax utility, we've added a pseudo namespace to even further remove it from the global scope.